see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here with Dian Killian, and thank you for joining me for this dialogue on how to build a culture of empathy.
Sure, thanks for organizing this.
And you're from the Center for Collaborative Communication, and you're a NVC trainer, as I understand it. Could you just share a little bit about yourself? And I have your website and your Facebook page here, so I'll show a little bit of it too while you just kind of talk about who you are and your background.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a certified trainer with the International Center for Nonviolent Communication. And I've also co-created a couple of books on this subject. One is called Connecting Across Differences, which I co-wrote with Jane Connor, which has just come out in a new second edition with Puddle Dancer Press. And I'm also the author of Urban Empathy, True Life Adventures of Compassion on the Streets of New York, which is a graphic novel format, vignettes, verbatim examples of me practicing nonviolent communication in New York City. And I'm also, by the way, a certified life coach.
And are you in New York, or where are you located?
I am. Our center is based in Brooklyn. I'm a third-generation New Yorker on both sides. I'm proud of that. Love that my passport says born in New York City. And while based in Brooklyn, the majority of our programming is in Manhattan, in New York City, and also other places around the country. And we organize an annual women's retreat, the East Coast NVC Women's Retreat, that's held outside Ithaca, New York. And we co-sponsor every other year with Santa Cruz NVC, the only retreat that I've heard of that's an NVC retreat that's focused on the LGBTQ community.
So you've been working with empathy for some time now. I mean, it's been a real interest of yours, and you've done a lot of workshops around it, and so I have a lot of experience with it.
Yeah, I've been practicing NVC for about 10 years now. I learned about it around 2000, and I was working as a freelance journalist at the time, and I did an interview with Marshall Rosenberg for a paper that's owned by the Village Voice that I was a contributing writer for. And I was intrigued, and I went to a couple of his workshops. And then I was working on a PhD, and involved with things, kind of took a break. I was in a practice group with Rita Herzog for about 9 months, around that time. And then I did a second interview with Marshall Rosenberg for the Sun magazine, and that interview is been pretty widely available. I don't know if it's still on the CNBC website, but it's called Beyond Good and Evil, Creating a Nonviolent World. It's also reproduced at the back of Connecting Across Differences. That was a longer interview. I got to talk to Marshall for, I think, about an hour and a half. It was like a 5,000-word interview, and that's when I really got excited about NVC. I had an opportunity to ask Marshall questions that were pressing for me. And in the process of doing the interview, I became even more interested, and then did a 9-day intensive. And what's really fun for me, kind of in my own NVC experience coming full circle, last year Marshall asked me to be on a training team for a 9-day intensive with him. So I had that opportunity in June last year. So it's pretty satisfying about 10 years ago to just started learning, and I was at the Rochester IIT, and then to be invited to be on a team with him. So, and I started the Center for Collaborative Communication in 2004, and became a certified trainer, I forget, around 2005.
Yeah, I just have the site up here, the Collaborative Communication site, and all the different workshops you're doing.
Yeah, I teach regularly at Kripalu, and last year I taught at Omega. I teach at the New York Open Center, the 92nd Street Y, and we also work regularly with organizations. Did a series of work with the UN Development Program for several years, other small nonprofits and NGOs, and we also work regularly with a corporate 100 client. We've been doing that work for the last 3 years, and it's very exciting. We now have just started our fourth 6-month program with that company that's really interested in integrating NVC in its work, so it's very exciting. And when we do work in a corporate setting and with large organizations, we refer to the model as collaborative communication. We let people know that it's based on Marshall's model. We just find it, for me, speaking about it as collaborative communication, speaks very directly to a quality of NVC, what it fosters, especially in a work environment. And I think it can be a little more connecting and less confusing for people. Because sometimes we tell people nonviolent communication or work environment, wait a minute, you know, we don't have violence here. It can kind of get in the way of people understanding the value of the model.
Yeah. Well, what I'm really interested in looking at is the aspect of empathy, and how do we raise the level of empathy within society, you know, within ourselves, between each other, and the society and culture at large. And so...
By the way, Edwin, I just want you to know, just hearing you talk about that, I notice I'm getting like chills in my body, because it's just so much the kind of world I want to see us living in, really. It's why I do this work. I want it in my community. I want it for the planet. I heard a quote recently. It was so inspiring for me, which was, as children, all we want is to be held. And as adults, we want to be heard. And I think that's true. So how do we go about creating a world where in pretty much any interaction, even if we maybe go off, you know, there's a bit of a curveball, that if we notice there's some disconnect, that we can bring it back and have that level of connection, empathic connection. That's the world I want to live in.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really important to you. I mean, if you're getting chills, it must be really resonating with you.
It is. It is. I feel very deeply about it. And it's really from my own life experiences, knowing what, you know, what I experienced growing up in my family and in this culture. And, you know, for me, empathy has always been really connected to what I would call like a political analysis or experience. And even in those interviews I did with Marshall, if people have seen both of those interviews, you know, my PhD is in the area of critical and narrative theory and cultural studies. And when I first really got what Marshall was talking about, I saw that how transformative this is on a socio-cultural level. And that, you know, yeah, I think everything that we can, well, I don't know about everything, a lot of what we do in terms of activism all plays a role. And for me, I really see this practice as a game changer in terms of how the society is functioning and the kind of dominant paradigm, you know, that we could label, you know, as oppressive, different forms of oppression. I see this as a direct intervention. So that's partly where my passion comes from, this work.
Well, one thing I've been starting to do is look at, I really enjoy metaphors, and empathy is often defined as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. And to kind of frame the discussion, I was wondering if you have a metaphor of what empathy is like for you. I could just say for myself, empathy is like a cornucopia. In the sense that...
Yeah. I'm curious, how does the cornucopia fit for you? I'm curious.
For me, every person is like a cornucopia of feelings. And like a cornucopia is like the horn of plenty, right? There's outcome, you know, all kinds of delicious fruits and vegetables and just all kinds of wonderful, a whole banquet of and for me, that's like what every person is, a whole series of these. And with empathy is we kind of share each other's cornucopia of experience. And, you know, the opposite would be like a desert, you know, where there's just nothing there, you know, just monotone. So,
loving this, Edwin. I'm really getting a sense of how, and tell me if this fits, like hearing you talk about this, I'm getting a sense of how, like how much you appreciate the almost biodiversity within each of us of experiences and feelings. And it's like getting to listen to a symphony, or like, as you said, be at this feast and really get to know what's going on for a person and all the complexity.
Yeah, understanding it. And also there's like an aspect of creativity in it. So it's the creativity, and every sense of creativity kind of sparks an energetic, you know, like the aha moment. There's like continuous aha, aha, aha kind of that. So it's a very visceral felt, because I know that's what you were talking about is really important to you, is the felt experience. So it's the same thing with the cornucopia, is like this sense of deliciousness and kind of this sense of plenty and all the different tastes and flavors. Because I do like freestyle dancing, And it's very much like the dance. It's like everybody's offering something. You're playing with it, and it's very creative and playful and interactive. You know, it's that part of the desert would be, you know, hot and overloaded and thirsty and in pain, and then, you know, the empathy is that cornucopia, that shared horn of plenty. So, how is it for you? What would be your metaphor?
I want to say first, I just love how you're describing your experience of empathy. And, you know, for me, I often associate it with some quality of like relaxation, openness, release in the body. And you're reminding me how when I'm empathically connecting with someone, it's also like synapses firing. And there is this creativity, and that's where the collaboration comes in. And so it's kind of interesting hearing you talk about it, reminding me how it's really a combination of both. You know, it's like sometimes when I have a sense of being deeply heard, you know, I really love I have a really big bathtub, and I love, you know, it's like a big old Victorian bathtub. I love, like, you know, in the winter, especially taking a really nice hot bath, like a bubble bath. And for me, like when I have a sense of being really heard, it's like almost like, oh, relaxing into that bath. Or, you know, where we hold the women's retreat outside Ithaca, they have this swimming hole. And just be able to go out there when it's really hot and lying in the water on your back, you know, like that kind of real relaxation, openness, expansiveness. For me, that really speaks to my internal experience when I'm empathically heard. And there's also, for me, you know, you were mentioning, I really do value somatic and kinesthetic awareness. And that really comes in large part because for so much of my life, I, in my opinion, I had pretty little of it. So now that I have it, I really appreciate it. And I'm excited about it. And for me, energetically, I often talk about this when teaching, that, you know, conflict or disconnection or, you know, whatever form, people missing each other in some way, it's like this kind of energy, you know. And empathic connection, I hope you can see this through the screen, it's this. So it's like shifting from this to this. I don't know if you can see my hand.
Yeah, I didn't see your hand. You have to move it up a little bit. Okay, so it's the reaching out.
From this to this. It's open-handed. And what I also point out is when one person shifts that's all it takes. Exactly. If you have two hands and they're in this kind of energy, what do you mean? I didn't say that. Well, we have to do it this way. Well, you never listened to me. Bong, 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 right? That kind of combative, you know, blocking energy. All it takes is one person to shift that. And then where does this hand go? Maybe I move back. If like this, and one person shifts to this, where does this go? It impacts the whole dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
It's like kind of law of physics. So like I used to practice Aikido. It's like, you know, stepping aside. You know, as I often say too, you know, if you hear a judgment or blame, how can you avoid being what I call human flypaper? Rather than it sticking on you and it being about you and experiencing shame and wanting to be defensive. And, you know, really when we become, quote, defensive, I know my need and other people's needs is really around understanding and empathy and connection. So how can we let whatever's coming at us kind of pass by us and then hear, so it's not sticking to us personally, and come from this energy and hear, you know, what's going on for the other person? How can I extend that energy? For me, it's very consistent too with the image of the giraffe, which I'm sure, as you know, is the symbol in North America for NVC and empathy. And, you know, as often as mentioned, you know, the giraffe is one of the largest hearts of any land mammals, but also with that long neck, it can see the whole savanna. So for me, part of empathy is getting the big picture. Because I find so often when I'm going into judgment, I'm seeing like this much. I have my own story in my head. I'm missing something. And so for me, practicing NVC has really helped me develop my curiosity. And so I'm going into judgment. I'm, okay, I don't know what it is. I know my brain is thinking that this thing is the whole picture. There's probably something I'm missing here. What is it? And that's like the, you know, and often involves going to talk to the person and saying, you know, I'm seeing this much and it's a trigger for me in whatever form. This is my internal response, what my feelings are, what my needs are. You know, can you tell me what's going on from your point of view? Because I find I'm usually missing something. There's something that I was lost in translation or I don't know, or some experience that they're having I haven't heard about. And when I can come from that perspective, it's like having the giraffe with the long neck that can see the whole savanna and sees the whole terrain. That's what gives the giraffe safety, in my opinion. Not only are they fast, they use their head to reach the leaves, of course, for nutrition, But I think it really helps when there's you're out there with all kinds of other animals to see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So that's another metaphor. We have the metaphor of the felt experience of sitting. Empathy is like sitting in the bathtub, just relaxing, everything relaxes. And empathy is also like the reaching out to another person. So it's sitting in the bathtub, maybe reaching out like this.
With a giraffe head.
with a giraffe head, looking out. It's like, because that's a felt sense, right? It's like, I don't know if you've ever been to Yosemite here in the Sierra Nevadas, but there's an inspiration point where you're kind of like you just see the full openness of all of Yosemite, and it's just so incredible. There's just this sense of opening that kind of happens when you just can't help it. You know, you just see kind of like the grandeur of it. And then, so it sounds like that's kind of the culture of empathy that we want to build. Is we're all going to be sitting in the bathtub with extended hands, with the giraffe heads, and we're coming from a world of kind of conflict like this, and scarcity, and just looking through kind of a little window. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this before, Edwin, but, you know, the fist, you know, the line I like is, and it's anatomically accurate, I've heard, that our heart is the same size of our fist. So, you know, kind of what muscles are we going to use? But I hadn't thought of this until you were just talking now. But, you know, a closed fist, for me, it's like holding on tight. It has tension in it. It's also about scarcity. When we're coming from this kind of energy, this is the abundance. And it kind of reminds me of the analogy you started out with, the metaphor of cornucopia, because when we're really empathically connected, we are seeing the big view. We are in a place of abundance, of generosity, of openness, of understanding, acceptance. And the reason I have this image of the bathtub and fully relaxing is when we really connect with our needs, we are in that zone of abundance so completely. And our bodies know it. I mean, often I say at trainings, we do some somatic exercises where participants experience empathy. And I ask them, you know, check in with your body. What's going on in your body when you're connected with the conflict and your anger or sadness or disappointment, whatever the feeling is around the unmet needs? What goes on in your body when you've been empathically heard, when you connect with your own needs or others do? And that's the natural kinesthetic somatic response. We relax because our needs are being met. Even if they're not literally being met in that moment, just connecting with the value of that need, the quality of it in our lives, our bodies don't know any difference, which is kind of interesting. I mean, maybe, you know, if you're hungry, your body would actually notice the difference of food in your belly or not. And there are so many needs that if we connect with the value of them, we can relax and our bodies can return to stasis, equilibrium, just through connecting with the value of those needs. And then I often ask participants, so when do you think you're going to have the most constructive conversation? When you're in this kind of energy, or when you're like, I'm in this bathtub, I'm at Yosemite looking at this view. And it's when we have that big view, that openness, that relaxation, we're going to have the most effective conversations, I think.
So how do we get from here and from here to that openness? It's like somehow we have to transition from this state to that state.
Yeah. Well,
we're here. We're kind of I guess one thing you were saying is you kind of have, somebody's got to reach out, but why do you want to reach out? You know, why do you want to leave that? I guess, yeah.
So I'm hearing you. I think I heard a different question a moment ago. The question I'm hearing now, and I want to see if I'm getting this and which one you'd like me to respond to. I'm hearing now, like, why would someone want to reach out?
Yeah.
Well, it's more fun. I mean, I just increasingly look at, like, you know, Marshall talks about, you know, making life more wonderful. You know, maybe I say it's my New Yorker and my hard edge. Sometimes I connect with that. Sometimes it sounds like, in my judgment, almost a little twee. But for me, I can really connect with just what's going to be more fun for everybody, which is really what Marshall is talking about when he says what's making things more wonderful. So do I enjoy being clenched up in my body? Do I enjoy that experience of tension? Do I enjoy having judgments of other people and enemy images? I mean, Marshall talks about, actually, in the interview I did with him for the Sun magazine, that, you know, there can be a certain level of pleasure in having judgments of other people. It can meet some needs, like for expression. If we're talking with someone else and they have a similar judgment, it can give us a sense of companionship and understanding. And wow, whoa, when we take it to the level of what our feelings and needs are, like that's where the live energy. It's like digging around in sand and finding gold. So it's just it just adds to life.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I have that experience over and over again. Like when there's any kind of misunderstanding, tension, or conflict, and we get like the sweet spot of empathic understanding, it's gold. I'm convinced that we all had a taste of it. Every time people learn NVC, I don't think in 10 years of sharing NVC, not once, and I mean, I've shared NVC with thousands of people at this point, including in Thailand at the Southeast Asian Office for the UN Development Program. So it's not just North America. I've done trainings in Europe, internationally. Without an exception, when people experience what we're talking about in NVC is empathy, they want more. It's like, it's delicious.
Yeah, it's just so delicious. It's a real sensation. It just feels so good. It's almost like we're biologically wired to kind of want that.
Yeah.
It's like it.
We are, and most of us, we're starving for it. I mean, I'm getting kind of tingly again saying this. I mean, something I often say in trainings too is, okay, what you've experienced today in this training, my request to you is you go out and you share this with one person this week. And I don't mean like telling someone about it. I mean, listen to someone and just even recap, reflect back what you're hearing them say. Listen silently what their feelings and needs are. You know, one thing we do in the trainings I offer too is we do a practice of what I call listening with our whole body. What is it like to listen to another human being or any living creature, cats, houseplants, babies, any living being, with every cell of our body? And that is such a profound experience. And when I ask people, how many of you have had an opportunity of being heard that way in the last week or the last month? I'm sad when I think about how few people raise their hands.
Yeah, it's like it's even more than being heard. It's kind of being felt. Maybe it's like because it seems that the empathy is a very felt sensation, and what I asked about is like what would be the, I guess one of the questions I have is about the intention. It's like, how do people get the intention to want to create a culture of empathy? And I see so far what I was hearing is it just feels so good. It feels so right. It feels so fulfilling that, you know, how can we not want it?
Yeah, because we all ultimately crave understanding and compassion and to be heard. And, you know, you mentioned about like we're hardwired for it. Edwin, I imagine you may be familiar with some of the research that's been coming out, like Rifkin's book, The Empathic Civilization. There's a book that's been on the New York Times bestseller list by Daniel Pink on left brain and right brain thinking. And he talks about the 6 crucial senses for our culture as it's developing. One of them is empathy. And by the way, all 6 of the senses have an aspect of NVC practice in them, by the way. So I think it is our birthright, and we've been living in for centuries, for millenniums, you know, what Walter Wink and Marshall Rosenberg refers to as a domination paradigm. And so we're raised, it's almost like we're born in a certain country, and then at a young age, at birth, we're taken to this foreign country and raised in this foreign environment that's like a different language than what as human beings we really need. Because empathy is a need. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most basic human needs. And, you know, Rifkin and others are arguing now, I say arguing in an academic sense, they're not really like debating it. They're suggesting with significant scientific and historical evidence that it is our nature to be empathic, and that evolution, that we wouldn't have evolved as a species without it. And, you know, like kind of, I would say the old school view of like the caveman with the club was that we wouldn't have developed or evolved without competition. all of the studies, science, anthropologically based now that's being developed is suggesting otherwise.
Yeah. So now science is kind of showing how we're biologically wired for empathy.
Yeah, so absolutely. And there's books that Marshall has been talking about for years that I really love. One is Riane Eisler's The Chalice and the Blade. Another is Walter Wink's book, The Powers That Be, that talk about these power structures on a large scale and how they're operating in our culture. And Eisler looks at new anthropological evidence that's been uncovered since the 1940s and 50s. And it's like, I just find her recreation of early society and her documentation of evidence about how, as human beings, we lived peacefully together for thousands of years. I mean, some of the villages she describes are ones that have, and they can tell from doing excavation, no weapons, no hierarchy. There's no one like buried in a separate area with extra special stuff. There's no fences or walls. And these villages were in valleys. So as she points out, and archaeologists point out, you wouldn't have communities like that if there was war and combat going on. It's only to a certain point in human history that you find forts and villages built up on hills and weapons buried, you know, at cemeteries and, well, in the grave sites. So there was a shift that took place in human history at some point from peaceful and empathic.
So somehow we went from this metaphor of this to this metaphor that life is all about this. And
yeah,
now
this and this.
Oh, that's the other, the top down kind of, yeah. So it's kind of like two levels, but it's all based on the fist and constriction. So we went from that to this kind of mess that we're kind of in now. And it seems like we need to go back to this.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And the reason we want to go back to this is, it sounds like, I'm just kind of rephrasing here, is one, it feels so much better. And now we've got the academic scientific proof, or, you know, arguments that this is kind of our nature. And
also, Edwin, I think it's key to our survival as a species. You know, I worry about the planet sometimes, and I actually think the planet as a whole has a much better chance of surviving than we do as a species sometimes, and other living species on the planet. So, you know, the population, I think the UN just announced recently that the international population, I think, is 7 billion, I think. You know, it's how are we going to, we're increasingly becoming like one big village. How are we going to live together and share our resources as spaces become smaller, literally and metaphorically? I don't think war is a successful solution. And I don't think I'm being idealistic. I'm being very pragmatic when I say that. And I'm saying it even also for environmental reasons. When you think about the environmental impact of war, everything from nuclear, you know, we still have plenty of nuclear weapons on the planet, to either other form of armament, what happens to the air. It's like, it's, for me, it's not, you know, empathy and peace. I don't see them as luxuries. Hearing each other. And, you know, and the other thing is, for me, there's this exquisite connection between like thinking globally and acting locally. Because, you know, it's like Gandhi said, you know, how do we go about being the change? And I really do believe this ripples out. And so how each of us, the more people that can be heard, the less pain and suffering. And the less pain and suffering, the less violence is going to be. It's all connected. So
you're kind of like connecting a culture of empathy to kind of our survival. It's like, hey, if we don't do this, you know, we're going to die, basically, or live pretty horrible lives.
Yeah, part of me hates to be in like this, you know, apocalyptic kind of view of things. And, you know, hey, we could continue on the way we're going for a lot longer too. And, you know, rather than just survive, let's thrive.
Yeah.
Because here's my question. I love to think about this sometimes. Like, what would our culture look like if it was truly based on empathy? What would it look like? I mean, I think most of us can't even get our brains around it. But just like, try thinking of it on a small scale. Like, what would our neighborhood be like? What would our cities be like? I mean, that's the social experiment for years I've had passion around as being a New Yorker. You know, like if we can hit the tipping point here where 20,000 New Yorkers know how to empathically listen, they have that skill. How is this going to affect the whole culture in New York City?
What were you envisioning? What were the images that came to you?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I could give specific details, but just like a high level of cooperation, mutual support, connection, trust. You know, about 6 years ago, I got a ticket from the New York City Police Department because I went through a handicap gate in the MTA system. And I swiped my card there, and I thought I could swipe my card at that gate, and the gate opened. So, or the gate was open. I opened the door and I went through. So I thought I was entering the system legally. And I got a ticket because apparently my card didn't work at that turnstile, even though there was no marking on it that said handicap only, but it was only for handicapped people. So I got a ticket for, quote, jumping the turnstile, although I didn't literally do that. But I'm telling this story because I asked the police officer to come to court because I was really, you know, upset about what happened because he was already writing the ticket. But I said to him, I'm wondering if you saw me swipe my card. And he said, yes, but it wouldn't work at that turnstile. I wanted some sense of trust about my intentions. And I think my opinion, my sense had about zero capacity for that. You know, I think his take on it was I knew I was swiping the wrong place and I was just using that as a guise to get into the system. But my point is, when I went to court, I spoke to him and the judge about my vision as a New Yorker, the kind of city I want to live in. And part of it was like, you know, I would really love for there to be a sufficient level of trust that, you know, because I asked the police officer in court, I'm wondering when I came up to you and you started writing me the ticket, was I surprised? Would you say, and you're interpreting, he says, well, yeah, he agreed to that. So like there's certain cues. I said, I would just love that. And of course, it's part of a whole larger system because I think he also had a quota of tickets to write that day, part of his job responsibilities. But that aside, where there is a level of trust and connection and communication. And that's what I said in court. I said, yeah, even a city the size of New York, I would like there to be a level of trust that the police officer could have said, you know something, do you realize that you just swiped a card that doesn't work at that turnstile? And we could have had a conversation about it rather than just making an assumption about my intention. So that's just kind of one example of what, you know, it could look like. It would be a completely different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say society would be completely different. I mean, I was at some of these demonstrations with, you know, people who, there was a shooting here by a subway officer shot an unarmed passenger there on the subway part. And there was big, you know, demonstrations and riots and all that. And, you know, I talked to people there and some from African American communities, and I said, well, tell me about empathy. And they said, well, nobody comes and talks to us. You know, nobody hears us. It's like they come now when there's this crisis, but nobody's here when there's no crisis. And they said, you know, we would like, you know, the police to come and talk to us. And so it was like people were asking, you know, just, I guess I'm imagining all these areas of the society that are in great pain and feel alienated, that would be, you know, there'd be a reconnection. And I imagine just that reconnection would be like a source of energy for people to problem solve and work at, you know, living more fruitful lives.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a thought, Edwin, hearing you talk about this. You know, we have a military and Department of Defense. The Department of Peace is working on having, you know, something similar to that around peacemaking in the U.S. You know, what I would love is, you know, that there be something like similar to like almost like creating empathy, like, you know, I don't want to call them armies, but people who know how to empathically listen, and there'd be like 800 numbers. And, you know, my vision is imagine a world where every single person, which is, by the way, that's how we came up with 20,000 in New York City. I figure most people in New York, the social circle, they know about 50 people. And I would love if 20,000 New Yorkers know how to practice NVC and listen empathically, then that means there'd be one person in every 50 who knows these skills. So what would our culture look like if every single one of us knew at least one person in our lives who we could call, we knew could support us and listen empathically to us? What would it look like if parents were raising their children this way? I mean, my heart breaks so often when I oversee and overhear parenting. And I know the parents are doing the best they can. I know that. And it's just, it breaks my heart because I can just see the pain and the hurt, the power over all of these dynamics just continuing into the next generation. So all of this would change if we had an empathic and based society. And by the way, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, and I'm okay with that too because I think it's evolving. Like you said, there's a creative element to this. I'm really curious to see. I'm convinced it would be a lot more delicious than what we're living with now.
Yeah.
But who knows what will happen?
Well, I had asked, before this dialogue, if you had some ideas about building a culture of empathy, and one you said is see as many people as possible trained to listen empathically. So I guess that's what you're kind of addressing there, is we need to kind of have people trained so they have these skills and they can kind of spread it on to others.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, there's different practices. And, I would love everyone to have one or two empathy buddies. I would love for every organization to have some form of a restorative circle practice. I would love, schools that are based on NVC. There's a spot in a classroom where the children can go when there's been some disconnection, and then someone will come over, they sit there and support them. There's a process. I would like to have some form of that in every organization and workplace. And I also think time is going to change as we step into that, and also our view of abundance. How much stuff do we actually need? What really matters to us when we're holding all of our needs? And if we really can trust that our needs matter and there's a level of interdependence and mutual support and care in our culture, do we really need to stockpile so much stuff? Maybe what we're really wanting is more time in our lives, so we have time for connection.
And one of the other points you said is make this a cultural value already happening, and they said empathic civilization. So I'm kind of seeing that as just, it's a bit what I'm kind of working on as well, is make it a conscious cultural value. Like there's empathy throughout society, and it's pretty much, for me, it seems pretty much the glue that's holding our society together. But people aren't very conscious. It's taken for granted a bit, and it's like, put a name on it, say this is the empathy that's holding society together, and we need to consciously raise the value of empathy within our social structure and be kind of conscious about it, as well as, experiential.
I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that wherever we are in any given moment, that we can have those resources to hear other people. It's like, for me, it's more preemptive and has more quality of, quote, national defense than any armies or armaments could give us. And I also think, by the way, the more we implement this, the more it's going to challenge and shift dominant structures in our society. And it's going to do it in a way that's revolutionary, unlike any other revolution we've seen. Or maybe, well, maybe not nothing we've seen, maybe close to what Gandhi did, but it's also going to be different from that. But it's a revolution that we can enact every day. And, at the same time, on a pragmatic level, offering this kind of work in different formats and organizations is a complete game changer for organizations in terms of just getting your work done every day and how you work with colleagues around collaboration.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a practical aspect too. It's like sometimes people think empathy is just this feel-good kumbaya, but there's actual, productivity, problem-solving, effective functioning qualities.
Yes,
as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I know other people are saying this as well. The future of our workplaces is around collaboration. And the key to collaboration is hearing both parties, opening up that space for creative synapses, you know, that kind of igniting of new ideas, and that comes from people hearing each other, which is what empathy, you know, on a very pragmatic level, empathy is about hearing ourselves and hearing others.
So if you had a couple of short 60-second or less empathy tips, do you have some tips that you would give? Like tip one would be,
when you're practicing or wanting to be in empathic space?
Yeah, for creating more empathy. Like, what would be tip number one?
Breathe. Breathe, notice your feet on the ground. If you're really triggered and you're lacking the space to hear somebody else, see if you can change your physical environment, step outside, take a walk, take what I call adult timeout. The things that I feel most strongly about, Edwin, are the ones that have been my own biggest learning curves. So that's where my passion comes from. And when I'm in the middle of something, I so want to solve it. I'll just keep trying to go with it and figure it out. And you know something? A lot of the time, the best thing is just to take a break. I wonder if this is making sense to you.
Yeah, it's kind of breathe, just step out of kind of the focus. Maybe sometimes you had the metaphor of the opposite of empathy is just seeing through a little straw. And the breathing is kind of opening and kind of creating that open hand, as you were saying, and creating that space.
Yeah. And the other piece, you know, is a next step. I really love what I call recapping. In NVC circles, it's most often called reflection. I prefer to call it recapping because I find when people hear reflection, they think it can be confusing for people, and they think they're supposed to be reflecting and responding.
So if I can just say, so tip number two is to recap. Tip number two to create empathy is what? To recap?
To recap, just to let the other person know what you've heard them say. It's a very simple and very powerful practice. It's a form of observation. For those listening who are familiar with the 4 steps that we practice in compassionate communication, the first step is to come with an observation free of judgment. And by the way, it is so common in my experience with people when someone says something, especially if it's a trigger for them, to immediately go into response or reaction. So if we can just say, okay, this is what I'm hearing you say. Taking the breath first helps. Maybe taking a break, saying, I'm just going to step out for 5 minutes if you're really triggered. And then say, okay, this is what I heard you say. That in itself is profound because it slows down the conversation, supports both parties in being heard. Sometimes you find out, A, you didn't hear the person accurately, or B, you heard them in a way that they intended differently. So sometimes, you know, someone might say something that I find really offensive. And if I just say, well, let me check, is this what I heard you say? And they go, oh, no, I didn't say that. It's like, okay, well, that's what I heard. And I may be really sure that they actually said that. Maybe they didn't realize they were saying it. So recapping it back, so that's where we say reflection is like a mirror. So they have a chance to hear their words, how you heard it. That in itself is really helpful as a first step. And because we all want to be heard, if we can first have a sense that we've been gotten on a cognitive level, it goes a long way. Third tip, practice self-empathy. That's, you know, for me, taking the breath, noticing your feet on the ground, stepping out, that's all part of that. So it's, you know, I increasingly, when I teach NVC, I have like 3 basic dance steps, and it's like a triangle. And the top is self-empathy. And then there's a line goes down to self-expression, another line. The bottom of the other corner of the triangle is empathic listening. Everything starts with self-empathy. If if we're lacking self-connection, if we have a desire to be heard, we have 0 space to hear others. So we got to put, as you know, I say and others say, put the oxygen mask on yourself first.
And that's the self-empathy. Put the oxygen mask on for self-empathy. Make sure that you're calm and connected to what the sensations going on in your body.
Yeah, and the way we practice this in nonviolent communication is you notice internally your own judgments. What's going through your head? I'm suggesting that you know, avoid sharing those judgments with the person you're judging, because they probably are going to have a hard time hearing it, especially if you're delivering it with an intensity. So just notice what your judgments are, and then listen, within your judgments for what your own feelings and needs are. Connect with your own feelings and needs. Take a moment to imagine the need that really matters to you fully met. That's where the somatic integration happens. So say you're really needing, I don't know, clarity. Take a moment to imagine, what is it like experientially when that need is fully met for me? Integrate that, take it in. That's where you have the bathtub. Or as organisms, we can relax a little bit when that need is heard and gotten. And once we've had the somatic shift, that's when we're ready to have the conversation.
Well, this is, we've been about an hour in this dialogue, and I like to go for about an hour or so. I mean, I really enjoy these metaphors, and just, you had the metaphor of in the bathtub, relaxing. Empathy is sitting in the bathtub, relaxing, and kind of an open hand, kind of opening up. And the opposite was closed fists, pounding each other, or dominating each other. So we're kind of going from this world to the bathtub.
Which, by the way, I want to point out too, this energy is also, the open hand is really the energy of a request, you know, which is the fourth step in NVC, a request that's free of demand. Exactly. Because when we're in demand energy, it's this, or it's like this, like pulling, it's pushing, this kind of energy. Request is, you know, it's just this open hand offering. That's the kind of energy. I mean, that's another juicy thing to imagine, Edwin. Just, I'd love everyone listening to this, imagine what would our world look like? What would the United States look like if everything we did was coming from an energy of a request rather than a should, a demand, a have to, a law, an obligation? What would our, quote, laws sound like? I think they'd be more like, we call them public agreements. What would our public agreements sound like if they were based on the energy of request rather than punishment?
Rather than a threat, yeah. Well, I think that will, I'm open for having future dialogues around this. You know, this has been a real pleasure to dialogue with you about this and explore this whole topic of how can we build a culture of empathy. So,
yeah, well, Edwin, I've really enjoyed it too. So thank you again for inviting me and for coming up with this idea. I was just part of the Empathy Summit, and I just love how I'm seeing you and others using the technology available to further build a community of empathy practitioners, empathy lovers. Well, we already are empathy lovers. Empathy liver beers, I don't know.
Yeah, so this networking and connection that can happen now through this technology is kind of opening up a new world for us.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.